Thank you, Stephanie, so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me. I am so excited and so grateful to be here.
Stephanie, I found you through following you on Instagram, your account, You Happy. It is one of my very, very favorite accounts to follow. There's something so beautiful. Well, aesthetically, it's beautiful. The visuals are gorgeous, but also there's something every time I go to it, every time you post, there's like this gentle, compassionate energy to it. Sometimes I'm having a stressful day and I'll see one of your posts and it's like, I can relax. It's like a
Hmm.
breath of fresh air in a world that's kind of telling us to hustle and do more and work harder. So thank you. Thank you so much for creating it.
Oh my gosh, I feel so touched that you found that in it because I can't tell you how much that means to me. I really think that the more that we can create those spaces for each other, the better off we will be. And so I really make them for myself a lot of the time too. So I will often find, go back and be like, oh yeah, I could actually like really use this today. So I'm right there with you.
I'll start with the very first question I ask all my guests, which is as a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Oh, I wanted to be a bunch of different things, which doesn't surprise me when I think about my career path over its duration. I wanted to be a marine biologist. I wanted
Mm.
to be an actress. I wanted to be the editor of Vogue for a while. I wanted to be a writer. That was one of my first dreams. A teacher. I wanted to be some sort of artist. And I think that running through all of those threads was like an exploration of different parts of myself and different parts of my personality and my dreams. And I think that's one of the things that's so interesting about a career, like you can explore these different parts of yourself in new ways and different
Yeah.
environments, which I've been really fortunate to have some opportunities to do that, but no like one thing that carries through to this
Yeah.
day.
Well, no, I love that. And I can see how those things show up in the work you're doing today. How do you see them connected to what you do today?
I think that, I always have loved teaching and learning. I look with so much jealousy at people who are still in school, and I loved school. I absolutely loved it. I loved learning. I think that's probably the main passion I have. And for me, I think orienting myself towards experiences and opportunities that help me to learn and to then in turn help to pass that learning on has been probably like the key thread of all of this. And so the idea of teaching and learning and creating things that connect with people is probably how I see that those childhood dreams connecting to what I do today. And I feel just so fortunate that I get to explore those passions in my daily work.
It's beautiful. Yeah. And I see that the artist piece showing up in the visuals you create, in the teacher. I learned something when I read your captions, that they're very great captions on just the science behind what you're posting about. There's like a learning moment in each post. So you're
Mm.
teaching within this platform, so it's very cool how it shows up for you. So I know you talked about kind of like as a kid what you wanted to do, but in college, did you know like I eventually want to start my own thing, or like what were your thoughts? Walk us through kind of your journey to today.
Yeah, of course. I would say no. I think that for me, I have thought about my career in a couple of different ways. And one mental model that has been really helpful for me has been thinking of it at different distances and trajectories. And so I have had a very clear idea of an extremely long term vision. And that's been a part of my life for since I was in high school, really, which was
Hmm.
to simply help make the world a slightly happier and slightly better place. I think that's probably one of the highest order visions that you can have, right? There's about a billion different ways that you can do that. And so this long-term orientation for me has always been something that I wanted to work towards. But the middle term, what does that look like? And the short term, I always viewed those as being things that were flexible and open to possibility depending on where life took me.
Hmm.
And in a way, that's been really helpful because I think sometimes we get really locked into this idea of what we think we either should do or what
Hmm.
we're supposed to do, or we have this idea of a purpose and then we go and do it. And actually, it's really not exciting or engaging at all. And oh no, oh, what do I do? What do I do about this? And especially I see that happen sometimes with people who have spent a long time working towards something, like becoming a doctor or a lawyer or something like that. And so I think that one thing I've learned is that if you have a broader aperture on what you want to do, and even in thinking about like, what's the question I'm trying to answer with the work that I do, which has been something that has been really helpful for me, then you can find these really interesting and creative pathways to doing that are more flexible. And so that has taken me in a number of different places. I did my bachelor's at NYU, and I was at a school at NYU where you actually get to create your own major. So you design your whole curriculum, and it was really fun. And the curriculum that I designed was around how do we improve the relationships between individuals, organizations, and society as a whole in order to elevate the interests and well-being of all of those different parties. And so it was.
How did you know that that's what you wanted?
I felt as though work was specifically the way that the workplace is structured in the United States and other Western countries seemed to me as a naive 20-year-old to be quite broken, and it was creating a lot of harm for people. And I thought that perhaps there would be a more generative way to consider how we work, and doing so in a way that benefits all of those different parties involved. What does it look like to use individual strengths and purpose in order to drive and propel a collective of individuals within an organization in order to improve the world and make it a better place? And to me, it seemed like these three different gears of individual and collective and society were ripe to be disrupted in terms of how we consider those relationships to one another. And obviously, we've seen a lot of that playing out over the last 18 months. The world of work has been disrupted, and the world of humans has been disrupted. But I think that curiosity of how those relationships work has always been just of really great interest to me. And so after I graduated from NYU, I went and worked at Deloitte Consulting, and I specialized in HR management consulting. So we would go to companies and help them figure out how to make their workplaces better. So it was very pertinent to what I was really passionate about, and a really amazing experience for me to learn how to do that. And then I moved out to the Bay Area from New York, and I went to work at LinkedIn, and I was there for 5.5 years. And I had like 4 different jobs while I was at LinkedIn. They were wonderful and gave me all sorts of really cool opportunities to try different things. And I felt really inspired by the mission we had, which was to help people to connect with meaningful work. And while I was at LinkedIn, I went and did my master's degree in positive psychology. And then after that, I went and worked for Thrive Global, where I was the head of our learning and curriculum. And I designed all of the programs that we delivered to companies that were to help improve well-being and performance in the workplace. And then while I was doing that, I started working on the new happy. It was actually the result of my master's thesis, is this proposal that our definition of happiness is flawed and that we need to adopt a new one. And I started working on that, and then eventually last year decided I wanted to go full time on that, which has brought me to where we are today.
That's amazing. And then you mentioned learning as being kind of a value for you. You've been able to kind of incorporate that in all of your roles, it seems like, sharing the learning, teaching.
I've been so lucky. Yeah, it's been such a gift, like getting to share and meet people along the way who are really passionate about this stuff and who have such great perspectives and interests. And learning has certainly been, I would say, a core feature of everything that has excited me about all of these different opportunities.
I'm curious, your work at Thrive, what did you see in terms of like organizations and wellness? How did you help with that? I'm sure there's people listening like, oh, how could I incorporate wellness into my own organization or my own company? What did you see works?
Yeah, of course. So I think that my belief is that well-being and true well-being is something that requires systemic action and policies and change, as well as a commitment from leadership. And I saw this play out as well in my work at Deloitte. When you have investment and buy-in from the highest tier of leadership at an organization, your initiatives are much more likely to succeed. And when leadership is willing to put their talk into action by implementing policies and structural changes, that's when really good stuff happens. And we know from behavioral economics and psychology research, we're not always rational. We do things that can harm us in the short term, and we respond differently towards incentives and punishment. And so there's a lot of different elements, different levers, I think, that need to be pulled in order to really transform an organization. So I think from a leadership perspective, there's so much that even managers can do to support their teams in terms of thinking about what they can do in order to influence them. Some studies have found that your manager is the most important person in terms of your engagement at work, as well as helping you to prevent burnout and overwork and stress. And so for managers, they have such an important role to play in this in terms of supporting their team. And it's about what work that I've seen is in very clearly and explicitly stating their expectations for the team. So letting them know that you don't need to respond to my emails when I send them. I don't expect you to do A, B, and C. If you have too much on your plate, I want you to come to me and tell me that you can't take on another project and that we need to reprioritize. So this element of clear communication and feedback is so important. And then another one is respecting the autonomy of your team. And we're kind of seeing this play out, I think, right now with companies as they are considering how they return to work and what that looks like. And obviously with so many people resigning from their jobs because they don't want to go back to the office, respecting your team's autonomy in figuring out, if you give them a task or a job or a remit, letting them figure out how they want to do it, letting them decide when and how they want to organize their work and structure it and get feedback, giving them that sort of freedom is so critical. And then the third thing I would say is that managers who walk the talk are going to help model for their team about what that looks like. So when your manager works 24/7 and never takes their vacation days and responds to emails within 2 minutes, no matter when they're sent, and all of these kind of signals, employees pick up on that and they feel pressure, even if you say explicitly. So as a manager, your actions carry weight as well. And so modeling these things, whether it's, taking your maternity or your paternity leave or talking about your own mental health, like these are things that really matter. And so I would say that those would be my guidance for managers. And then for individuals, there's tons of stuff that we can talk about too, if that's of interest.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think this is so relevant to what's going on today. I know I see it in my client conversations as a coach and just with friends and who are maybe feeling, there's a lot of burnout right now, a lot of exhaustion. The lines have been blurred since we've been working from home for so long. I see it with friendships, and people are working a lot longer. And so I love that you share those things, especially this last one, managers walking the talk, modeling what they're saying. And I took Brene Brown's Dare to Lead training last year, and she talked about clear is kind. And so I love that you talk about this clear communication, because sometimes communication is not very strong. And so it builds up these expectations, or people are assuming what people are thinking. And so it brings a lot of stress into the work that doesn't necessarily need to be there.
That's so true. And just the reality is that your boss has a lot of power over you, right? That relationship can significantly impact your livelihood and your ability to care for yourself and for your family if you have one, and impede your goals. There's always going to be a power differential, and managers, sometimes it's easy to forget that, how much weight people put on your actions as a manager, right? Everything can be interpreted in a way that, as you said, potentially isn't what was meant. And that can create a lot of unnecessary stress and anxiety for people that would be just really, really lovely to avoid that in any way that we can.
Yeah. And then for individuals, you mentioned there's a lot of things for individuals to do. What comes up as kind of some of the top things?
I think that for most individuals, a lot of it is learning how to prioritize yourself. And it's so much easier said than done. It is one of the hardest things in our world, where it seems like there's never an end to the things that have to get done and the responsibilities that people have to bear and the stress associated with that. But I think that once you realize in your own life that you can be a far more effective and compassionate and resilient person when you take a little bit of time for yourself in whatever way that means for you, giving yourself what you need, it allows you to see that it's not a luxury, that is something that goes at the bottom of your list,
Mm,
but it's something that can really support you in all the other areas of your life and your
mm,
goals. And I really think that unfortunately we've sort of overcomplicated this idea of self-care, and it's been so
mm,
commodified by the wellness industry,
mm,
and we've lost really sight of, I think sometimes we lose the plot a little bit, but really like what I like to advocate for is this concept of 5 minutes of care, taking simply 5 minutes for yourself. And really, a lot of us don't have more than 5 minutes. Like parents, working parents from home right now, or
mm,
caregivers, or people who have to work multiple jobs, or just the stress and the demands of one job for many people, right? Like there's so many challenges that are pervasive, but most of us can find 5 minutes in our day to do something that rejuvenates us a little bit. And what I like to say is thinking about what is it that you need right now, and how can you give that to yourself for 5 minutes. A lot of the time for me, what I need is a walk. Like I just need to go outside
mm.
and I
Yes.
come back and things are a little bit better. They're a
They seem
little bit
better.
more manageable. Yeah. Right? Like they're not as terrible as they were before I left. And but a lot of the time we just think, oh, like I don't have time for this, and
Yeah.
it's too hard to do that. And again, with this whole, I think many of us have this mindset that stems from our old happy culture that like you need to revamp your life completely, right? You need to quit your
Mm,
job and find this like
mm,
perfect new
mhm.
existence. And I just think that's very harmful and very flawed. Like we
Yeah.
don't, most of us don't need to do that. We need just a little bit more time for ourselves, a little bit more support in our lives, and
Mm,
we can start to give that to ourselves in a way that really makes a difference. So that would be the practice that I would advocate, is committing to give yourself 5 minutes of care
mm,
every day and just asking, what do I need today? What do I need right now? And allowing yourself to have that without guilt, without judgment, and then seeing how it goes for you. Like, does it help? Does it make a difference? And if it doesn't, you can throw it out. And if it does, great. Like maybe there's new ways to find more 5 minute pockets here and there, things that fill
mm.
you up or that support you in helping you to work towards your goals.
Oh, I love that. It's so practical too, and can make such a big difference. I know when in the past when I was really stressed out, I felt like I didn't have
Mm,
time to do a 5 minute thing or
yeah.
even like step away for lunch. I was like, no, I have to be chained
Yeah.
to my desk. But when I left, I would feel so much
Exactly.
better. Yeah. I think a lot of people feel that way. Like I don't have time.
I know. So
Mm.
it's so true. I've felt that too. So I understand. It can be really hard. And I have so much empathy for anyone out there listening to this who feels that way. I've definitely been there as well.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate you talking about it and giving us a simple, practical tool that
Hmm.
doesn't seem because I think in order for us to have successful change, it needs to start small. And
Yeah.
so I like that you mentioned, not just quitting your job. A lot of times what I find in client conversations that's not necessarily quitting the job that is the problem. It's a lot of it like maybe the boundaries, a lot
Mm-hmm.
of things that can be changed within a role that doesn't require us to leave. I mean, sometimes it does.
Mm,
Like for me, I wanted to do a different line of work, but sometimes it's not really the work itself. It's how we're managing the day, our stress,
mm,
our self-care, like you mentioned.
yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. That's so wise.
When you think about new happy, what do you think about? How would you describe it? You mentioned the old happy, and then your account is the new
Yeah.
happy. What do you think about when you think of that?
I think that the question that sent me to grad school and that has propelled me to launch the new hobby has been, why, despite the gains in quality of life and of comfort and luxury and all of these
Mm,
external trappings,
mm,
why is it that we are unhappier than we've ever been before?
mm,
And my perspective is that we in the Western world have been taught that happiness comes from achieving things for ourselves, from racking up accomplishments and pursuing individual greatness.
mm,
And I think it's wonderful that people prioritize fulfilling their potential and pursuing things that matter to them. But I also believe that we have lost sight of the purpose of that, which is that we are all interconnected and part of a global community of people, and we need each other to make this world livable, safe, equitable, compassionate, resilient, all the rest of it. And I believe that true lasting happiness comes when we act in service of one another and we support one another. And so I think that I often describe it as there's two, like a seesaw. There's the self on one side, and then there's the collective on the other. And we have overemphasized the self, and the collective has been neglected. And really, for me, it's a very interesting paradox, because there are also so many people out there who are working to do good in the world every single day, so many inspiring people. And we all have a unique way of giving to the world. And we can do that in a way that fulfills our potential and also helps the people around us. So I define New Happy as using your gifts to serve the world to make it a better place in whatever way that means to you, in whatever way is fulfilling and meaningful and enjoyable and allows you to experience flow and all the rest of the good things that we all want. And it honors the sense of interconnectedness and extends compassion and service outward as well at the same time.
Oh, I love how you worded that. That made me feel the sense of like this depth. There's depth there. I think the seesaw has kind of pointed towards achievement, and we can tie our worth to achieving. And if we're not achieving, maybe we're not worthy of things. So shifting that to the collective, I love that. I think when we have that deeper sense of purpose to serve others, it's about other people, and there's a sense of relief or happiness there, greater purpose.
I love how you say that. I think that paradoxically, the focus on the self has led to a lot more anxiety and stress and feeling of worthlessness, right? Because if you think about it, if your worth as a person is tied to what you achieve in the world, specifically what you achieve in terms of traditional stereotypical markers of success, then you're in a tricky bind, because if you don't achieve something, then you're not good, you're not worthy, you're a bad person, you have to work harder, there's something wrong with you. If you do achieve something along that path, you have to keep going, and you can never ever stop, because then your worth disappears. So your self-esteem has become contingent upon what you produce, and you have to continue to produce. And what happens when life happens, right? What if you experience a crisis? You get sick. Someone in your family gets sick. What if you simply are not interested in engaging in that pursuit anymore? All of a sudden, your whole schema of worthiness can fall apart. And furthermore, you're constantly preoccupied with what people think about you. You're constantly worrying about, have I done enough? Do I deserve a break yet? Have I finally gotten there yet? And then, there's the other bind, which is for those people who set their sights on a goal and they achieve it. They get maybe like a couple hours of happiness out of it, maybe
for a few minutes.
And then what happens, right? It disappears because it's not sustainable. It's not long lasting. And then they think, God, there must be something so wrong with me. I must have chosen wrong. I need to work harder. I need to prove myself even more. And so the other part of it that I've been thinking a lot about lately is that the flip side of this is when you think about our mental health crises that our society is experiencing, so much of the narrative around mental health in the past has been, well, they can't be depressed or anxious or have a mental illness because look at what they have. And you can just see how this old happy concept plays out, because people assume that these things are what make us happy. And again, I think there's nuance here, right? Like the data tells us that once you reach a certain income level, any additional income gains are not proportional to your increase in happiness. And every single person deserves the right to be, to have safe housing and to be able to afford their necessities and what they need and what they want and all of these things. I'm not saying that like none of that matters, but for people who are pursuing those things because they think they will make them happy, it often ends up backfiring. When you're pursuing something because it comes from within you and you have a desire to express it and share it with other people in order to help them to make their lives better, you are there, you're present because you're using your gifts, but you put yourself aside. And that allows you to not be self-conscious, to be less anxious, to be less concerned about it, and to elevate other people, which is where this lasting sense of well-being comes from.
I felt that. And your passion comes through for it. Your passion as you're talking about that your own purpose, how you're serving, that comes through so clearly.
Oh, thank you.
If someone's listening and they're thinking, that's me, I'm doing the thing where I'm trying to achieve to find happiness. My worth is
Mm,
tied right now to the next promotion, the next salary increase. What questions can they be asking themselves? Or
mm,
how can they start shifting to the new
what a
model
great
of happiness?
question. I think that there's a couple of different ways that one could approach this. For people who are willing to be like, I don't really know if this is what I want to do, and like let's do a total like reset and go really deep. One thing I always love to ask people is, if you could wave a magic wand and
Mm,
solve any problem in the world,
mm,
what would you do? And the thing about that is that everyone has something they care about, right? Like everyone has something that they're affected by personally, that someone in their family has been affected by, that just for whatever reason makes their heart want to fall out of their chest because
mm,
it's so painful and
mm,
upsetting. That's a clue for what
mm,
you might want to work on. And so, for example, if let's say somebody listening answers that question, it's like women's rights, like just that is the thing for me. I know I read about it because I'm really interested in it. It inspires me in how I work and all these kinds of things. Well, okay, great. So now you have this kind of big picture thing. And then again, kind of this brings us back a little bit to the beginning, but
yeah.
the amazing about this is there's a bunch of different ways you can do that, right? Like you don't have to quit your job to help with women's rights. You could Google local organizations for girls in your community. You could volunteer for a domestic violence hotline. You could
Mm,
research candidates for your next election and figure out who
mm,
has the best track record on women's rights, who's working to support them, and then help and canvas for that candidate. You could go to your workplace and think, okay, I'm going to work on my women's group ERG that's happening,
mm,
or if there isn't one, I can start one up. Or I'm going to
mm,
consciously choose, I want to mentor 3 women in my community or at my company and support them and help them to reach their goals. All of a sudden, you have fundamentally put yourself in a
mm,
different position. You've found the way to serve exactly in the lane where you're passionate about, and you can make a real difference in that way.
mm,
And none of us is here to save the world. Like none of us is supposed to carry that responsibility. But what I think is a much more empowering way to look at it is to think about, what can I do in my corner of the world,
mm,
in my home, in my neighborhood, in my school, in my workplace, with my neighbors, like what is it that I can do there? And when you can put that together with your talents, with your strengths, with your skills, and combine those, you can start to make change happen right away. And I think that's
mm.
a really beautiful and inspiring and hopefully relatable and actionable thing.
I love that. Yeah. So trying to bring those two together. And then the focus is towards others, serving others, bringing those gifts to the world versus like you were talking about the self and achieving. And I guess the question that popped up as you were talking is, how do we avoid, like, let's say someone says women's rights and this person is an achiever. So where they don't turn in the achieving into the into that lane, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And I actually think it's great. Like you should celebrate your accomplishments along the way because they take hard work and effort,
Mm,
and they are things that you deserve to be proud of. And pride in what you do for others is something worth celebrating and
mm,
savoring and all of that. I think that the key distinction is achievement as a byproduct of service rather than
mm,
achievement as the core goal. And
mm.
we can look at humanity's heroes and we can see and list off their meaningful achievements, right? Like it's not something to be ashamed of or anything to
Mm,
dismiss, but they were doing it because that was what they felt called to do. It was where they felt they could impact their corner of the world. And
mm,
all of them started with just their local communities, right? They
mm,
started in one spot and offered up their help in some small way. And so I would say that there's a really interesting paradox, which was outlined by a researcher from Berkeley in a book called The Power Paradox, where he says, we are given power when we do things for the collective, but we fall from power when we forget that we're in
mm,
service other
mm,
people. And, we all know examples of politicians and powerful people who have done bad things because they forgot about the kind of the core. And so I think that to answer your question, it's great to celebrate what you accomplish in your work and to savor it because that can also be quite motivating and fulfilling all of that is a really great source of meaning. And then continue, then, you wake up the next morning and you go back to helping in some small way and keeping your focus on that. That would be my perspective there.
Mm, thank you for that. I did want to make sure I touched on how you started New Happy. I think you mentioned you started it while you were in your old role. How
Mm-hmm.
did that come about? Like, do you create all the visuals? Like, how did that get
Mm-hmm.
started? It takes a lot of courage to show up in the world and do something like that, to create and put it out there. And so I'd love to hear kind of how you got started.
Thank you. That's so kind. I was helped by somebody. And again, like that's why it all comes back to that for me, because I fundamentally believe that we are all where we are because people helped us.
Mm.
And I could list the thousands of people who helped me to get to this moment. The main person would be my boyfriend, Alex, who as I mentioned, I had come up with this new definition of happiness as my thesis when I was at Penn. And it was like 200 pages long and unintelligible academic writing that nobody would ever want to read. And so I had no idea what to do with it, like literally none. And I kind of like put it in a drawer and was like, maybe someday I'll use this. And I feel totally overwhelmed and I have no idea how to get started, which I know is something that a lot of people feel about their passions and their purpose. It can feel really, really overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
And so every like couple months or weeks, I would kind of go to him and be like, oh, I don't know what to do. I'm unhappy. Like I'm not living my purpose and that kind of thing. And, why don't you do something about it? And I just never really knew what that looked like. And eventually he kind of sat me down and was like, okay, what is the smallest thing that you can do to start sharing this with people? And that is why my focus, I've been so influenced by that, because I really believe that starting small is the secret. And I said to him, well, I've kind of been like thinking about maybe starting a newsletter and just writing about this once a week, any things people might be interested in. This was back in 2019. And he was like, great. Okay, we're going to start a newsletter. And like really, he was like, okay, you're going to send your first one in 2 weeks. Like, let's figure out what you're going to call it. And we spent a weekend batting ideas around about what to do. And then finally, on hour 8 of our brainstorm with no success, he was like, what was your thesis called again? And I was like, oh, it's called A New Definition of Happiness. And he's like, well, there's the answer. It's the new happy. And so we like got the domain name and he was like, okay, you're just going to write a newsletter and that's all you have to do. And so I started doing that and I just wrote the newsletter every week for about a year. And then as I was working at Thrive and I was just super busy with all that and stuff happening in my life. And then eventually I was like, okay, I'm going to invest in this and see what I can do. And I thought that Instagram would be a really good way to reach people because I realized that there was a lot of the content I enjoyed consuming was about teaching me little things, like little bite-sized pieces of information. And it struck me that it was almost like a form of micro-learning. And I was working on micro-learning in my job, like creating videos and content for employees. And I thought, this is micro, like I could put out a little something every day and maybe people will be interested. And that's when I started posting content on Instagram. And at the same time, I was also like, well, I'm really interested in figuring out what's a compelling way to reach people. I don't want to just use text. I want to create visuals, like almost like I'm creating a piece of learning content every day. And so that's what led me to start teaching myself graphic design and creating the posts. And so that's been like about a year now of that. And it's been so funny. Something I never thought I would do has become one of the greatest sources of joy in my life. So I feel really grateful for that.
And they're so special because the colors you use and the simplicity of them. I think I found you when someone reposted, I think it was like a big circle and it was fear and then fear after action. There's something so simple, but so powerful about them. They communicate the concept so clearly and they're so helpful. And you're right. It's like, I know I consume most of my content, like just scrolling. And so that there's something helpful and bite-sized and micro that I can learn and that I can share and that could spread. I'm always resharing them. And then I always get comments of like, yeah, people are like, oh, I needed this. I needed this today. And so you're making a difference in like a micro in a post at a time, which is really cool.
Oh, thank you. That's so nice. I feel so privileged. I feel so lucky that people allow me to be in their digital spaces. So it's a real honor and something that I strive to take care of.
Well, thank you so much for being here today. How can people follow you? How can people subscribe to your newsletter? Tell us all the things.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, you can find us at thenewhappy.com or on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook at New Happy Co.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stephanie. This was so lovely. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. What a wonderful conversation. I'm so grateful.